I have three sons in ministry. Two of them serve in pastoral lead pastor positions. Another one has served on staff as administrative pastor of a large church and now has his own stewardship organization. And I get all kind of perspectives. It's fascinating. But sometimes what is really fascinating is to hear the different perspectives of my youngest and oldest son, each of whom are pastors. And really, they're both my pastors. When I'm in Florida, Sam is my pastor. When I'm in Tennessee, Jess is my pastor. Well, they have a different opinion on how many weeks should a pastor preach each year. I'm going to present not only their opinions, but I'm going to present what we are seeing and when and how pastors are deciding and their churches about the number of times, as we often put it in common vernacular, how many times will that pastor be in the pulpit? We'll be looking at that. How many weeks should a pastor preach each year? Fascinating question. I'm glad you asked it so that we can answer it. And we will get to that in just a moment. In the meantime, thank you, Belay Solutions. You hear me talking about them every week. I just got to say that I personally like their assistant role that they offer, and that is they do the hiring, they do the placement, they match you, they do all the back end work. If anything negative happens, they take care of that as well. And that person is there to take a load off of the leader, and particularly for a pastor, but any type of leader, CEO of an organization, small business, whatever the case may be. They're wonderful. They are responsive. And I'm going to just commend you to check them out. It is one of the best investments we have ever made, and we've made it several times at Church Answers. Also, look for their download in the show notes. 25 tasks a pastor can delegate to an assistant. And as well, go to belaysolutions.com/Thom Rainer, and you can find more information about that particular download. How many weeks should a pastor preach each year? All right, I'm going to give you the typical range that we hear. It's a wide range. We've asked this to pastors on more than one occasion, and the range is this: 40 to 50. 40 on the low side, 50 on the high side. That's a pretty significant range, 10 weeks or 10 preaching weekends, whatever the case may be. And we're better, more than just say, this is what you should do. We're going to give the reasons why some are on the 40 and some are on the 50 side. Okay, what's the difference between the pastors who are saying they preach maybe 50 times a week, which means they're only out of the pulpit 2 times a week? What's the difference between that and a pastor who says, I'm okay being gone 10, 8, or maybe even 12 weeks out of the year? You know, what is the difference in there? Well, I'm going to give you 4 characteristics of the differences between the two. Those who, well, let's put it this way. One of the factors is it depends on the age of the church. All things equal, a younger church will have more flexibility about the pastor being out of the pulpit than an older church. All things being equal, an younger church will have more flexibility than an older church. So a church that is 5 to 6 years old may have more flexibility about the pastor being in the pulpit than an older church. Jess is in a relatively new church. His church has been around for about 6 years. And from the onset, he has been out of the pulpit maybe 7 or 8 times a year. I'm not sure if it's that many, but that's just a guess, maybe 6. He's not always gone those times he's out of the pulpit. It's not like he's on vacation, but someone else will be preaching. In fact, I have filled in for him, which is kind of weird going from a 30-something to a 60-something, which we do when I fill in for him because he's got such a young church. So, but then Sam, on the other hand, is at a church that's, 70 years old. And they have an expectation that their pastor is going to be in the pulpit quite often. So the older church tends to have greater expectations than the younger church. A second factor is it depends on the age of the pastor. The younger pastors tend to feel more freedom preaching less times than the older pastors do. In the case of my 2 sons, they're 5 years apart, and Jess is the younger of the 2, but not enough significance in the age difference to say that's the factor. more the age of the church there. But oftentimes the age of the pastor will determine how often that pastor is willing or even desirous to be out of the pulpit. We have heard from a number of pastors that put these types of numbers as minimums and maximums. In fact, one would say, I cannot imagine being out of the pulpit more than 6 to 8 weeks out of a year. They'll refer to that as the maximum. And most of them will say you need at least a couple of weeks off. That would be the minimum, where there would be 2 Sundays or preaching times that the pastor would meet. So we hear the range. The range is often dependent upon the age of the church, sometimes dependent upon the age of the pastor. And again, that range, 40 to 50, that's a pretty broad range. Most of them were in like the 42, 43 to 46, 47 range. There are some pastors that say, I'm not going to be out of the pulpit hardly at all. They would be closer to the 50 range. Now, one other point that we want to make up on this is we've talked about the age of the pastor, the age of the church, the range that is there. Another thing that we want to just talk about is, what is the agreement coming into the church? When pastors go into a church, they don't always get specifics about how often they're to be in the pulpit. I think that needs to be clarified. That's when most of your church members and guests, for that matter, are going to see the pastor. That's when the visibility is greatest. And so whether it's in the terms of engagement to become a pastor or it's in the specifics of the call to that church, there needs to be some understanding and maybe a range put in there as well. Now, another factor is simply some churches are very comfortable with multiple teaching, preaching pastors. That's the way it is at Jess's church. Jess can't just let anybody preach on a consistent basis. Well, I guess he can. He lets me preach. But I'm there to preach. Another elder is fairly regular preaching there. And so I won't say that he has a preaching team per se, but he has a preaching bullpen, if you will. And so he's able to go to multiple teachers and preachers. Our church in Nashville is comfortable with that. My church in Bradenton, Florida, the older church, obviously strongly prefers that the pastor is in the pulpit on a more regular basis. So, answering the question, how many weeks should a pastor preach each year? We didn't answer it, except we gave certain situations that lends itself to more or less. We did not give any type of moral or qualitative answer, but we did tell you the type of churches that are at one side or the other. How many weeks should a pastor preach each year? My favorite answer is always this: it depends. And that's the case here. Thank you as always for listening to the Church Answers podcast or watching us on YouTube. Remember to give us a rating, give us a review, tell us you like us, subscribe to us, all those things. And that can get the word out that we have this free information on a regular basis, these bite-sized podcasts that will continue to make pithy and that we hope will have potent information for your church and your ministry. Thank you as always to Belay, and don't forget to download 25 Tasks a Pastor Can Delegate to an Assistant. You can get that at belaysolutions.com/Thom Rainer, or you can get the information in the show notes. We'll see you in the next edition. We're going to talk about church members being more change resistant than ever. Stay tuned. We'll see you. Hey, folks, this is a PS to our podcast. We got some exciting stuff that we want to offer you absolutely for free. Sam, when you think about predictive factors in a church's growth, if you take out demographics, what are some things that come to mind? Just two. I mean, don't give me a list of 10. Just 2 or 3 things that come to mind on predictive growth of a church.
Well, evangelism and whether the church is doing it or not.
Bingo.
And then I will add, is it an ongoing evangelism emphasis?
Double bingo. Well. Maybe something about leadership and their commitment to that. So all of the above.
Evangelistic churches have evangelistic pastors. Is the staff, is the lead pastor doing the work themselves?
We have a free download for you, and it's actually a sheet that you can self-score. You answer 20 questions, anywhere from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And we come back and we predict what your growth rate is going to be for the next year in worship attendance. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a good tool. There's a link to that for the attendance predictor. Look in the show notes. You'll absolutely love it. That's cool. We'll see you soon.